All right. No horsing around here. We're going to rank every one of the Metal Gear Solid games that are coming with the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection so that you can know which ones, to play first and which ones aren't worth a damn, okay? And you could probably already guess which ones I'm going to say. If you follow my channel, you know I've been playing through these. And I play a couple of these. I play with some degree of frequency, even many years later. Okay, so the first thing that you got to know is that this is the best one in the series, absolute masterpiece, Metal Gear Solid 1. This was originally released on the PlayStation 1. I'd say about 1998 in the US, okay? Something around that area of time. And it's a damn masterpiece. Now, what you're going to get two versions of that game in this package, which is pretty cool. And they did not raise the resolution, though, which I thought was odd. And we'll see if it has any weird, like, wobbly textures. Like, the PlayStation 1 had a weird time handling 3D. And so, there is a strange kind of a thing that had happened where you got all these pixel artists doing the textures. And because it was all low poly models, it just had this insane, like, retro charm. And it was the best of the best. I sold all of my PlayStation 1 games except for Metal Gear Solid 1. It's that good. And even by today's standards, it's one of the best damn stories ever told in video games. Okay, you're going to get two versions of that. You're going to get the US release, and then you're going to get a version called Integral. And Integral comes with a bunch of ninja missions and like VR missions, which are basically just little challenges like, hey, here's how you use the sneaking abilities, and here's how you use all the different weaponry. And one of the coolest things about Metal Gear that's been true ever since the very first ones that ever came out. Oh, I better use a better color. These were the first ones that ever came out in the US. And what they've always done is you get all these different items, and these items can be used to fight bosses. Things like mines that you would lay down in the ground to stop tanks from rolling through, and things like that. And you get to use those in different challenges in those VR missions in Integral. It also has like a first-person view that you can walk around in first-person view. It also has, I believe it has Japanese language support as well, or it's in English, but it has Japanese subtitles and some other variations too, like scenes that are not in the regular US version. And I think that's kind of a real treat for a lot of people in America because it was only released for PC previously. This was the PC port, was the Integral port for Metal Gear Solid. But back in the day, like in the 90s, not everybody had PCs. It wasn't as common as it is now. But I would highly recommend start with that sweet baby right there. Start with Integral. Play the Integral version. There will be some scenes that are changed and altered for this. Apparently there was like footage that they couldn't use because they didn't have the rights to it anymore or something like that. I don't know. I can't really go into that because I can't speak too much to it. The other thing I'm gonna point out, probably the one that you're not gonna want to play. Like, I would put this in the never touch category. This is Snake's Revenge. This had nothing to do with the original creator, and I don't want to poo-poo on it, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on some negative crap. But let's just say they didn't understand what Metal Gear was. They tried to turn it into like a Commando kind of a game, and it ended up kind of falling a little bit flat. And to be fair, and whenever somebody says to be fair, it's usually followed by bullshit. But this time I'm telling you the truth. Okay? To be fair, they didn't know what the heck they were doing. They were like, oh, Americans love Rambo and Americans love, Commando. And this was during the era of the 80s tough guy movies, which I really sorely miss, by the way. And so it's not a bad action game. It's just not Metal Gear. So it gets an F in terms of like ranking of Metal Gear games. And you might be going, well, but dude, like Trent, and I'm going to switch to like a red here so we can get it really nice. You might be going, dude, what's up with this jazzle? What's going on with these jazz hands? This is the same game, right? No. Okay, so I want to explain something to you, man. And a lot of people who might not know this much about Metal Gear history might not realize that the Metal Gear that we got for the NES, which I possessed a cartridge of for 30 years since its release in the 80s, was not actually directed by Kojima, and in fact, it was not a true port of the actual game. So I put this one pretty low down there. It's still good, don't get me wrong. 80% of the game is the same as this was actually, these two games were for the MSX. They're 2D games that use stealth and sneaking, and you're like crawling on your belly, and like you're actually like sneaking into tank hangars, and a lot of the scenarios that happened in these two games are still really, really good. And in fact, what they did, if this is the same version, and I can't confirm this, but if these are the versions of the game that, the versions of them that came with this subsistence version of Metal Gear Solid 3, then these have updated imagery. So when, for example, you're on the codec with Solid Snake, you're going to see a representation that looks like the Solid Snake from the current games, like Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2. But the originals were released just for the MSX in Japan, and then they ported these two over to the US, and they weren't really done by the same team. So that's why these two kind of get pushed down. But these are, like, as far as 2D games go, not really going to be as important as the 3D games, the PS1 and PS2 era. That's these three games, right? So, but I would say that some events happen in these two games that are really cool backstory for the characters. For example, there is a character in Metal Gear Solid 1, which is actually the third game in the series. This is the first game. This is the second game. This is the third game. This is in the release sequence. This is the fourth game. This is the fifth game, technically. But when they started Metal Gear Solid, they started over with like a Metal Gear Solid title. It was always just called Metal Gear before that. And then, but events happen in these games that in these MSX games, these 2D sneaking games, that absolutely affect events that occur in this. It's not essential to play them, so I still stand by play this one first, because there's a lot of things that happen in this game where they're like, oh hey, remember that guy that you fought back in Zanzibar land? Well, he first appeared in this game. You rescue him. His name is Gray Fox, and then in this one you have to fight him. You're on opposite sides, and then they become richer and richer. And in many ways, what's kind of cool about the Metal Gear Solid collection, or the history of it all, is that you're really seeing the evolution of a storyteller. And you see the writer, the director, playing around with these ideas and these concepts for what is essentially just kind of like an 80s tough guy sneaking kind of a game, and which was actually created out of a limitation of the technology, because they couldn't have too many sprites and bullets on screen at once back in those days. And so the director wanted to do something where the player would sneak by enemies rather than face them, and that created tension. And that's where the stealth genre for video games came from, but also inspired by movies like The Great Escape, for example. And you see a lot of that playing out in these first two early games. But I would still place the second one a bit higher. I would place it a bit higher in the priority list of which ones to play than, like, say, the very first NES one. And the primary reason being because, like, there's really neat stuff that happens in this game. In some cases, you're, jumping into the back of a truck, and like, you catch a ride because you put a cardboard box over your head and you catch a ride to a different part of the base. And like, that was just weird thinking. It was really unusual. And to be quite honest, and yes, that stuff happened in the US version as well. But if you play through this MSX version, you're going to find a lot more of those really creative things that didn't quite translate or get carried over, because I think the developers were just confused by them. Back then, we didn't have Rockstar game developers. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have like Kojima was just employee number whatever at the studio. He was a director for video games, but back then games, didn't really sell more than, you'd be lucky if you sold 100,000 copies of a video game like Metal Gear, right? So it wasn't like a big deal. And in the news media, they cared more about brands like Nintendo or Sega than they did about the developers. I think the first game developer that I ever heard their name was Peter Molyneux, and that was in like 1999 or 2000 or something like that. You just never heard developers' names unless you were really hardcore about it. Maybe, what's his name? The creator of Doom, McCormick or whatever. But whatever the case, I don't want to get off topic. They did kind of upgrade all the textures in Solid Snake, the second one, and the story became a lot more rich. That's where we started to see more of the, instead of a transceiver, it became like the codec, and it's the first time we've really saw like, Foxhound logo and stuff. But what really happened is like when the PS1 came out, they just upgraded all of it. Like it went straight up into characters acting and performing, and that just changed everything, and changed a lot of gaming too, just in general. And this is always a very highly debatable topic between these two. So Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3. Many people will fight over which one is better. And certainly there's stuff in Metal Gear Solid 2 that you absolutely must play. Okay, you must play this game because especially in our modern era, where this happened when this game came out. It was 2001, 2002, and we were as a nation, America had just gone through 9/11, and like there was a resurgence of patriotism, and there was also, really the internet was just becoming very wide open. And so there's a lot of constructs and concepts that really give a strong social commentary about information control. And in fact, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but let's just say that the very premise of what weapon is changes. And they talk a lot more about information control being weaponized in this game. And this was, like I said, 2002. So it was like really ahead of its time in terms of storytelling and very deep and rich. And that's also around the period of time that they started to get like real military advisors on board, but I'd still, so you get like things like enemy tactics, like how they would sweep a room and how they'd search for you. And there was really interesting things going on with the camera that they just couldn't do before. And don't get me wrong, like I played the hell out of this game. I played the hell out of it. I bought Zone of Enders just so I could get the damn demo for this. Okay. Played a lot of that and Onimusha at the time, but just that was that era. And man, I mean, like shooting up watermelons like crazy. And then like the coolest thing about it was really like certainly in the PS1 Metal Gear Solid 1, you could toy around a lot with enemy AI. Like you could strap C4 to their back and then like run around the corner, peek around the corner, and then detonate the C4 when they regroup with their friends. Like that was really unseen. That level of like, they're alive, they're behaving, they're doing their patrols, and then they look for you and then they go back. But the bodies had to disappear when you kill them, and like this one right here, Metal Gear Solid 2, was the first time that we really like had persistent bodies. You suddenly had to like hide enemy bodies if you killed somebody, and you had to watch where you were projecting shadows, because enemy soldiers on their patrols, if they saw your shadow around the corner, they could actually spot you, and then they'd go to investigate. And so there was a lot of tension. But the camera is really kind of hard to play around with by today's standards. In fact, you can't rotate the camera. There's sometimes where you just get really stopped up between going into first-person view and aiming, because you can't move while you're in first-person view because the director would get motion sick with first-person controls. Things like that were going on. And that problem persisted into Metal Gear Solid 3. But when they re-released Metal Gear Solid 3, they updated it. When I say re-release, they put out a version of it called Subsistence, which they did with this as well. With Metal Gear Solid 2, they did a version called Substance, which had like a bunch of things. Like at the time, Tony Hawk was really popular, and so they added like a skateboarding thing. And when they did this, when they did a version of Metal Gear Solid 3, they had a thing where they had a crossover with Ape Escape, and you could like go in and play this like Ape Escape like hunting little apes, that had like custom music and stuff like that. That won't even be included in this collection, and I'm a little sad about that. There was also a theater disc that came with Subsistence as well, which I still own, which is basically just a movie version. It's like a 4-hour movie version of the story of Snake Eater that was directed by Kojima himself. He went in and like edited gameplay sequences with the storytelling to like kind of make it more seamless and really, really neat stuff. But I still put, maybe some people would disagree with me on this, but I'm going to put this one, up here at the top, pretty much on par with, like, you could start with either of these, but the one problem you're going to run into with Metal Gear Solid 3 is that in only a matter of probably about a year, if all goes well, or less than a year, we'll be playing Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is basically a PS5 era remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. And so a part of me is like, well, just skip this one, play the modern sweet ass controls, like expanded kind of version of this. But we don't know if it'll be good, so that's certainly a questionable call. You know what I mean? This one also, by the way, takes place, we think, from trailers and whatnot, that we're going to be playing as Solid Snake, the main character of this game, and certainly a main important character of that game. Not the main character of this game, because you actually play as another dude named Raiden. And Raiden really upset a lot of people because he is a very different character, and it showed such a broad range for the writers to write such a different character. But with this one, they went back and they went, you know what? How about this? How about he looks like Solid Snake, but he's actually Big Boss? And I hey, spoiler alert, guess what? The very villain that you've been fighting throughout all of these other games, this one, and the guy that is like, you find out you were cloned from, basically, your own character's father, basically, the greatest soldier of all time, Big Boss. You're playing as him in his heyday in like the 1960s and 70s. So it was the 1960s. And it highly inspired by old James Bond movies with all the gadgetry and stuff. And so Kojima really showed his hand, the director really showed his hand when he made this game, because he even made the intro very reminiscent of the old James Bond movies. And there even the all of the tropes. Like, one thing that he really understood, and I don't know if it was just the team that he had at the time, or if it was just he had a very clear vision of what he was making, but man, just really captured everything that was awesome about old 60s James Bond. And maybe that was because he was a kid when all that stuff was coming out, and being translated to Japanese. And so, like, just this game right here is absolutely a masterpiece and a treasure. But again, I almost want to say, don't play that one first. I want to say play Metal Gear Solid 1 first. And also because, by the way, graphically, it's going to be a tough pill to swallow for some folks, graphically. Okay. If you can't handle that, if you can't hang with that, just watch there's a movie version of the graphic novel called Bande Dessinée that's coming with this as well. And it has a movie version of this game and this game as well. And you could just watch this, but I highly, highly recommend. It's only like 6 or 7 hours long. Back then, games were like, that's just cherry. That's the sweet spot for a game, in my opinion. Like 6 or 7 hours of like a story with lots of extras and some replay value. Like I said, I replay it every year, and I always still find new codec conversations that I never heard before. I always still find little things that you can get a little creative with that I had never really seen before. The level of atmosphere that they were able to achieve, just as a technical marvel for its time, Metal Gear Solid 1 is absolutely just, it's cream of the crop. The second game I recommend you play is Metal Gear Solid 2. Okay? Primarily because it is a direct sequel. It's literally like, a year ago, remember that incident in Shadow Moses? Like, the game starts out where we are literally seeing Solid Snake on the PS2 for the first time, fighting these Russian insurgents group. They're basically taking over a ship where they're stealing a Metal Gear. There's a new model of Metal Gear, and it's being stolen. And so Snake and some other of the characters that he meets from the first game reprise their roles. The same voice actors. It was so incredible for its time, that era of time, to be a gamer, to be someone who was following this series at that time. Legendary. Nothing else like it. It ain't like, oh, there's a new Call of Duty and there's, like, oh, Soap is coming back or whatever. There's nothing compares to seeing a PS1 character who was badass before come back and be so well represented here, in PS2 in all its glory. And I was able to go to E3 in 2001. And if you ever watch footage of that showing, it was like there was a crowd surrounding that booth the whole time. Nobody had ever seen any kind of a thing like that trailer. And you'll see me in the footage of just like sitting on the floor. I was a young man, just with my sketchbook, snuck my way into E3, pretended I was part of the game industry. At the time, I was not yet, not until 2003 or 2002, I think. Yeah. But I went in like 2000 or 2001. And so I saw it there, and it just blew my mind. I watched that trailer on repeat, and there's like subtle differences between the cutscenes. I watched it so many times that I know that there are subtle differences in the camera changes between the trailer and the footage that actually got into the final game, where Olga kind of pulls her gun out, and it's just a different shot, slightly different shot, and way better in the final game. But whatever the case, the reason why I say hold off on Snake Eater, and I said it earlier in the video, the first time you experience that story should be like cherry. And in fact, I almost think if you're kind of on the fence about this whole series and you're like, I don't really know like where I should begin, just wait, dude. Wait for Metal Gear Delta. Like that's going to be this remake. I hate having an X over like one of the greatest games of all time. So just wait on the remake of Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Delta. I'm hoping that they're planning to do a lot more. And once you're done with that, by the way, you're going to go, oh, I want more. Of course you're going to want more. Yes. And that's when you go and you pick up this Master Collection and you play as Solid Snake. And it'll be like 30 years later because it takes place in like 1999. With currently existing technology for its era, but really cool sci-fi cloaking tech and stuff like that. Oh, yes. I'm just thinking about it. Some of the coolest concepts ever made, some of the coolest characters ever made, some of the greatest villains of all times. And of course, what everybody really wants is a remake of that Metal Gear Solid 1. But I don't want just like a straight port remake. And there's rumors and speculations. Watch my video about Metal Gear Solid Delta. I have my concerns because they're talking about just reusing the same dialogue, no new added stuff at all, no expanded like space. Like, I really love the Resident Evil remakes, and I think that what's great about them is that the originals stand on their own, but playing the remakes give you this expanded sense of it. I think they did that with Resident Evil 3 and 4 as well. And it felt like I could still go back and enjoy the original, and it's a different experience. It doesn't feel like they're just, copy, paste, redo the same thing. But at the same time, maybe that's a good thing too, because these days everybody seems to just fuck everything up, like with remakes and sequels to stuff that were beloved before, and now they're just like, what went wrong? So maybe to some degree it's like, yeah, just leave it alone. But certainly, I have the utmost confidence that because they're sticking really, really close to the original material, I have a lot of hope for this game so far, right now, as of the time of like recording this. We'll see if there's new footage coming out soon. That we've got the winter season, we got a game show coming up, or the Game Awards show, like in a couple of months. Maybe we'll see some new footage from this. I don't know. I just hope that Metal Gear fans don't pan it just because it's not a Kojima product. You know, the original creator is not involved in the new remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. And in some ways, I think that's a great thing. You know, I would love to see, you know, a reprisal of that, come back to do Metal Gear Solid 6 or some kind of finale, you know, some kind of like, you know, Infinite Heaven, you know, Metal Gear Solid Infinite Heaven, some kind of a game that lets players make their own maps and, you know, really expand on the universe or make something replayable, you know, and then maybe I'm getting carried away. Anyway, all of these, though, truth be told, all of them, pretty much except for that one and that one, you know, all of these are going to be really pretty much in the order of descending down would be the best way to play them. You'll start to get curious about these games, the MSX games. You'll start to get curious about them after playing Metal Gear Solid 1. And that's another reason why I suggest that. And another thing to keep in mind is this game right here, Metal Gear Solid 3, really starts a new arc for the Metal Gear Solid franchise. In fact, when you start to play as Big Boss, and again, one of the greatest games ever made, definitely like top tier, top of the list. But you got to realize, like, this sparks Peace Walker, which is not included in this collection. It sparks Portable Ops, which is like when Colonel Campbell joins Foxhound. Not featured in this collection. This sparks Metal Gear Solid 5, which is not included in this collection. And technically speaking, what would have made more sense is if they had, you know, Metal Gear Solid, like, they should have broken it up into the two eras. So there's the Solid Snake era, which is, you know, these games. And then there's the Big Boss era, which is this one and the other ones that I just mentioned. Because soon after, like, the chronological order of the games is like this one, Metal Gear on the MSX, to Metal Gear Solid Snake, to Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation 1, to Metal Gear Solid 2, to Metal Gear Solid 4, which is another really awesome game. That should have been this collection. And then they should have said, all right, after that, you'll be able to play, you know, Metal Gear Solid 3, then Peace Walker, then Portable Ops, then... actually, I think maybe Portable Ops would have been before Peace Walker, if I'm not mistaken. And then the finale for Big Boss is... Technically speaking, the finale for Big Boss is Metal Gear Solid 4. He does make an appearance of sorts. Like, we know what happens to him in his final resting place, so to speak. But technically speaking, the finale or the last game that we see Big Boss in is Metal Gear Solid 5, which, if you're just like, I can't handle these old graphics, bro, then you know what? Skip it all, go straight to Metal Gear Solid 5. Hands down, the absolute most fucking rad video game ever made, and it never gets old. I've got 400 hours in it, and I could put in another 400 any day. Someday I'll retire just to replay that game again, over and over, here on my YouTube channel. Anyway, that's my long-winded ranking for the Metal Gear Solid games. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it helps you to choose. So I want to know which ones you're going to play first if you're into this series, if you've never played it. You know, hopefully this helps you. If you do play any of these, come on back and let me know what you thought of them. Maybe your order would be different. I'm fine with that. I'm not trying to tell you what you should like. This is my thinking on it. And as somebody who's played all of these games, well, at least these three I've played at least, this one I've played probably 24 times from start to finish. This one I've played 3 or 4 times from start to finish. This one I've played about 8 times from start to finish. So, I mean, I've got some mileage on these. These are hard to get through if you're more of a 3D gamer. So anyway, but you might have a different opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So drop that in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, ciao.